Hey everybody, here we go. This is KIN214. Now this is a second half presentation, if you will, where for the 4 R's we had rest, regen, recovery, which is kind of a blanket overall overarching umbrella statement regarding a process. And then we also had the fourth R, which was refuel, which I broke out into a different presentation because it was a little bit too complex just for one to get all of these in. So, the human body itself is made up of all these different systems that all kind of work together to make movement happen. You have the muscles that actually contract, you have the connective tissue, and we talked a little bit about the fascia and how it's that interconnectedness through the fascia lines, but also you have tendons and ligaments that connect either muscle to bone or bone to bone. The bones themselves, which are the levers and provide the structure in the human body, and the organs, which are kind of the onboard systems that keeps everything functioning and working. And then the central nervous system, which is the electrical wiring that provides the electrical impulse zap down to the muscles or provides the impulse back up to the body from the sensory side. So, all of these adapt differently to training. And training itself is a stressor you place on the human organism, and these are all part of the human organism. And so those stressors are designed in a way where you're trying to elicit a training response. So you want to have the proper amount of stress in the proper way on the human organism to get the training response that you want. But there's also the side of recovery, and just recovery in an umbrella statement, like just recovery across the board. Recovery is another type of modality that you place on the human body. In a way, it is its own little stressor, but it's different. It's used as a way to kind of reverse the effects of training. So when you look at general population training, you need rest, regen, recovery, and refuel. We talked about actually refueling properly and not eating junky food. But the process of working out actually injures the muscle on a microscopic scale. And if you have somebody that you're taking through perhaps like an elite level athlete, or they're a weekend warrior like a triathlete, etc., you have to push them beyond their comfort zone and perhaps what they're physiologically capable of doing or comfortable doing. So to that end, you kind of push them beyond their appropriate envelope where their body can respond and repair itself on its own. That's where you have to come in and actually work on rest, regen, recovery, and refuel. So like with strength training itself, we know strength training comes from two main things. On the first part of a training program, it's all about the central nervous system actually becoming more efficient and firing correctly. Zap, contract these muscles. Okay, zap, I'll contract these muscles as the impulse goes up and down the central nervous system from the afferent to the efferent side. And really, when you look at contracting, it's a bit of a contractile demand response cycle, the loop to it. I'll give you an example. Like there's a stove, and you go put your hand on the stove, and the stove is hot. Well, there's an impulse that goes up the central nervous system, zap, that's the afferent side, says, hey, dummy, take your hand off the stove is hot. Well, zap, the efferent side sends a muscular contraction down, and it's a motor contraction as opposed to a sensory impulse that fires the correct muscles to pull the hand off the stove. It's the same when you go to pick up a box off the floor. You go to pick up the box on the floor, your mind and your body work together to go, that box weighs 100 kilos, I better really bear down and hunker down and recruit a bunch of muscle to pick that box up off the ground. And all of a sudden you pick the box up and you throw it over your head because it's an empty box. So the contractile response is based on demand, and that demand is provided by what is in front of the person to lift or run up what hill or run across a field or do a certain amount of weight on power clean. So the central nervous system is a key component to this, right? The central nervous system is what fires the muscles, but it's also the sensory side of it as well. So strength comes from two things: the central nervous system becoming more coordinated and firing more efficiently and recruiting correctly. Then the other part of it is the muscle fiber itself actually breaks down. It gets broken down through training. It's injured on a microscopic level, and then the body heals that microtrauma, and it's through that adaptation and that training response that people get stronger. Usually this is seen on the front end of a program, that central nervous system adaptations, and then the actual strength gains that come from the muscle breaking down and being rebuilt bigger, faster, stronger through hypertrophy is further along in the program. So usually you're better off undershooting with weights on the front part, let people adapt to the weights and adapt to the actual movement pattern itself and recruit correctly, and then start loading the weights on. So we know from the general adaptation syndrome that the muscles respond, the cardiovascular system responds. We know all the connective tissue and the structure also responds. And so when you look at this and you look at the connective tissue itself and actually the stressors that are placed on it, it's often forgotten. And most people just don't really even think about it. And most people don't even think about the central nervous system, but that's a key component, especially with elite level high-end training on the power side of the scale. You can blow somebody out central nervous system wise and kind of overtrain them and put them in overtrain response because your loading parameters are off. Think back to the conversation of Sully versus Antoine. If we would do the same volume parameters for Antoine that we were doing for Sully, we would blow Antoine right out of the water because he's pound for pound so damn strong. So you have to kind of have these things operating in the back of your head when you're working with your athletes or your clients, and know that you're going to have physiological responses because of the stressors you're placing on these different systems in the human body. And so with rest, regen, and recovery, you can do this a number of different ways. And it can be as simple as a microcycle when you're functioning in a very small time frame and you're looking at how much recovery time you have in between sets. If you do a set of 10, rest 10 seconds, a set of 10, rest 10 seconds, and a set of 10 and rest 10 seconds, really that ends up being almost like one big fat set of 30. And if you do a set of 10 and rest 3 to 5 minutes, that allows a different recovery cycle than resting for 1 minute. So, it's the amount of time in between sets that matter. It's what you do in between sets that matter. So say, for example, if you do dumbbell bench press and you're doing 3 sets of 10 and you go off and do bicep curls for 3 sets of 10, you're still working your body, you're placing a stressor upon it, but you're working antagonistic muscle groups, so while you're working one, you're resting the other. Okay, so it's a bit of an active recovery. I got it. Okay. Now, when you get into, say, a heavy chest press, and then you back it up with a light fly movement, what you're doing is working the same muscle group, but you've stressed the central nervous system, you've stressed the muscles by doing a heavy bench press, and then after that you do a light fly movement to kind of get a nice little pump in the chest, increase circulation in the chest, increase blood flow in the chest to get a flushing effect in the muscle itself. So you can look at rest, regen, recovery in a small kind of microscopic scale or much bigger. And bigger itself, when you start to look at it, looks more like, how you can actually have a download week in an entire program. So in the month to the right, you'd have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 hard weeks of training of high volume, higher intensity as you progress in week 1, 2, and 3, as we saw in our linear training program earlier. But perhaps in week number 5, you back the loading parameters down, or you back the volume parameters down. Both are fine, both are appropriate, and both are good tools to use. And you can manipulate those. And as you look at this, you might have a download in week 2 for legs, and a download in week 3 for chest, and a download in week 4 for back, and a download. So it gets pretty complicated in terms of how you download or even unload your people. So the idea, though, is you have this kind of cyclical nature to your training, where you train the body to recover and work at a certain workload, and then by backing off for 1 week, you have this kind of super compensation pattern where the body recovers and over recovers for the next 4-week bout of training. Now, things that help this are, and foam roller is a biggie, right? Oftentimes you see people rolling around in a gym, rolling on a foam roller, working the muscles under here and the lats. They're also rolling their back, rolling their hips, rolling their glutes, and these are all appropriate. You have also static and dynamic stretching, like the gentleman over here to the right in the right-hand corner. That's more static. They're seated and touching their toes. Dynamic would be if they're walking and kind of kicking their foot up and doing a high knee march, or having the fingertips or toes go up to the fingertips. Now, massage therapy is another one that's wonderful, wonderful modality to help increase circulation, break up scar tissue, and aid in recovery. And I like all of them. I use all of them. I when I'm training, I'm like in higher end training, I'm really crushing my body. I'll definitely do ice baths, you know, got my dog with me, or I can just hang out and grab a hot tub and throw a bunch of ice in the tub and make it a cold tub. Another modality, it's real simple, is contrasting hot and cold showers. And if you're fortunate enough to have two different whirlpools side to side, one hot, one cold, this is really easy. But the idea is you have in your shower, you crank it up so it's nice and hot. You increase the temperature in the shower, you increase your core body temperature, you actually increase the circulation through the vascular system, and the blood is shunted to the skin. And as you're in the shower, then you turn the water over to super cold. And what happens there is you have this vasodilation from the heat, and then you have this vasoconstriction from the cold. And you repeat that multiple times. So you go hot, cold, and you have this kind of constrict, relax pumping effect that happens through the muscles. And it's the same thing if you do contrasting whirlpools or contrasting tubs. You get in one, you get into the other, you get in one, you get to the other, and you go back and forth for a couple rounds, and you end up having this vasodilation, vasoconstriction over and over and over again. And so it causes this kind of pumping or circulatory effect. With sleep, oh, I know you guys are going to love me for this one. That's when your body really recovers from training. That's when it heals itself. And there's a whole nother lecture that goes into why that is. But when you look at like this from the sleep foundation, based on your age and your activity, you guys should all be at 8 hours a night. And it might make you guys a little less cranky too. But it's when you start to recover. It's where your body actually recovers, and everything else is ancillary that you use to help this process, which is to sleep. And of course, as I've mentioned a bunch of times, follow a healthy food plan full of good nutritional foodstuffs that has a lower caloric density but a higher nutritional density. That's the way to go. And so when you have those all together, it's a pretty potent combination, no doubt, no doubt. You can't sit on the couch and do this stuff. You actually have to get up, get to the gym, get to the track, whatever your workout is, work out hard, push yourself beyond your envelope, and then use rest, regen, and recovery methods to help you recover more effectively. Okay, guys, signing off.